My husband spent the weekend in paradise with his mistress, captioning their photo "New Beginnings" while I stared at his suitcase in our hallway. Then came his text, "Sign the papers before I get back." He expected tears. Instead, I opened a hidden laptop folder named Salt. He wanted me to sign a transfer. I would. But first, I had 72 hours to ensure that when he returned, he would come home to absolutely nothing. My name is Mallory Keene. I stood in the foyer of Greyhaven, the sprawling estate that architectural magazines called a modern masterpiece, and I simply called a tax write-off. It was late, past midnight. The silence in the house was heavy, the kind of thick atmosphere that usually precedes a violent storm. A single suitcase stood near the heavy oak door. It was not mine. I looked down at my phone. The screen illuminated the dark hallway with a photo from Ethan's Instagram story. He was on a private yacht, the turquoise water of the Caribbean stretching out behind him. He was not alone. Brielle Sloan was draped over his shoulder, her hand resting possessively on his chest, her hair catching the tropical breeze. The caption was short, brutal, and devoid of shame. "New Beginnings." Then came the text message. It popped up at the top of the screen, casual as a request to pick up milk. "Sign the transfer papers before I get back. I'm coming home with my new wife." I stared at the words. Most women would have thrown the phone against the marble floor. Most women would have fallen to their knees and wept for the 8 years of marriage dissolving into pixels on a screen. I was not most women. I did not type a reply. I did not call him to scream or beg for an explanation. I simply turned off the screen, walked into the study, and opened my laptop. My fingers moved automatically across the trackpad. I bypassed the family photos. I bypassed the shared budget sheets we used for household expenses. I went straight to a hidden folder buried deep within the system architecture, protected by a firewall I had coded myself. It was labeled simply Salt. I had created this folder on our wedding day. My mind drifted back 8 years. I was 34 now, but back then I was 26, sharp and hungry, yet lacking the one thing the corporate world respected above all else, a deep voice and a tailored suit. I met Ethan Royce at a pitching event. He was mediocre at strategy, but brilliant at lighting up a room. He could sell ice to a polar bear, provided someone else packed the ice. I was that someone. I built Marrow & Co. from the ground up. I wrote the code. I designed the strategy. I secured the initial capital through aggressive negotiations. But I put Ethan's face on the brochure. I made him the front man. I let him believe he was the king so I could rule the kingdom without interruption. The first crack in our porcelain facade had appeared 3 years ago. I had brought up the subject of children. I wanted a baby. I wanted something real in a life full of projections and quarterly targets. Ethan had laughed, a dismissive sound that still echoed in my ears whenever the house was this quiet. "Mallory, look around you. You have the company. Why do you need a family?" I had smiled then, but I started keeping score. I started remembering every slight, every dismissal, every time he took credit for a deal I had closed while he was on the golf course. Now, he was on a retreat with investors. That was the lie he told me before he left on Friday. But the photo of the beach and Brielle's manicured hand on his chest made the truth blindingly clear. He thought he had won. He thought he had secured the golden parachute and was ready to cut the cord. He was wrong. I looked at the calendar on the wall. He was due back on Tuesday evening. That gave me exactly 72 hours. I opened a fresh document and typed a header, "The Exit Strategy." Beneath it, I wrote a list of 12 tasks. I needed to execute them with surgical precision. There was no room for error. There was no room for mercy. Ethan wanted his freedom. He wanted me to sign the papers that would hand over half of my hard work to him and his new muse. I looked at the cursor blinking on the screen, steady and rhythmic like a heartbeat. "He wants me to sign," I whispered to the empty room, my voice flat. "I will sign, but not the papers he thinks. I was going to sign the death warrant for the world he thought he owned. The memory of our beginning felt like watching a film reel burn, the bright, happy colors melting away to reveal the dark, brittle celluloid underneath. I went back to the year we were married. Ethan had proposed at a table overlooking the city skyline, the kind of place where a bottle of wine cost more than my first car. He held my hand, his eyes shimmering with what I thought was love but now recognized as ambition. "We are going to build an empire, Mal," he had whispered, sliding a diamond onto my finger. "Just you and me." But when I brought up a prenuptial agreement 2 weeks later, he recoiled as if I had slapped him. He did not get angry, he got wounded. He played the part of the heartbroken romantic perfectly. I can't believe you think I'm after your money," he had stammered, his voice thick with manufactured hurt. "We are partners. Why do we need a contract to prove we love each other?" I dropped the subject, or at least, I let him believe I did. I brought Ethan into Marrow & Co., not because he was necessary, but because he was decorative. I gave him a title that sounded heavy and expensive, Director of External Affairs. It meant nothing, but it looked fantastic on LinkedIn. He began giving interviews almost immediately. I watched from the sidelines as he sat on plush velvet chairs in television studios, telling the world his story. "I started with nothing," he would tell the reporters, leaning forward earnestly. "It was just a dream and a lot of sleepless nights." He was lying. I was the one who signed the contracts. I was the one who built the operational systems, coded the proprietary algorithms, and trained the staff until they operated with military precision. Ethan was simply the man who stepped onto the stage to accept the applause while I stood in the wings, holding the clipboard. My best friend, a ruthless litigator named Sarah, had warned me over drinks one evening. "Don't put his name on everything, Mallory," she had said, her voice low and serious. "You are handing him a loaded gun." "I know what I am doing," I had replied, and I did. I put his name on the documents, yes. But for every signature I added, I included a legal safety valve, a clause here, a subparagraph there buried in dense legal jargon that Ethan never bothered to read. He saw his name and stopped reading. I saw the fine print and kept writing. Over the years, Ethan changed. The charm began to curdle into arrogance. He started sleeping with his phone under his pillow. He hid his calendar access from me. His business trips became more frequent and lasted longer. But the most dangerous change was his voice. He developed a fondness for subtle belittlement. "You really should relax more," he would say, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. "You would never dare lose me anyway. Who else would put up with your workaholic nature?" Then came the fundraiser gala 6 months ago. That was when Brielle appeared. She did not look like a stranger. She walked into the ballroom with the ease of someone who had already memorized the floor plan. Ethan introduced her to me near the champagne tower. "This is Brielle," he said, his hand lingering on the small of her back a second too long. "She is a freelancer helping us with some PR strategy." Brielle smiled. It was a sharp, predatory thing. Later that night, I found myself washing my hands next to her in the ladies' room. She looked at me in the mirror, applying a fresh coat of lipstick. "Great party, isn't it?" she asked. Then she turned to me. "The boss." "Oh, excuse me. I mean, Mallory, I'm so used to hearing about you that I forget we haven't officially hung out." The boss. It was a slip. A Freudian slip, suggesting she and Ethan discussed me in a context where I was the authority figure they needed to circumvent. I nodded politely, but my mind began to race. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a week later when I was cleaning out his suit jacket before taking it to the dry cleaners. I found a business card in the inner pocket. It was heavy stock, cream-colored, with gold embossing. Ethan Royce, co-founder, Marrow & Co. He had never written a single procedure. He had never closed a contract without me in the room. Yet, staring at that card, I realized the terrifying truth. I was not dealing with a simple cheater who wanted a fling. I was dealing with a man who had told the lie so many times that he had started to believe it. Ethan truly believed everything I built belonged to him. I did not feel jealous. Jealousy is a hot, chaotic emotion. What I felt was cold and sharp. I realized that Ethan was not just a husband who had strayed. He was a liability who had forgotten who actually owned the ground he stood on. The house was silent, but my mind was running at the speed of a high-frequency trading algorithm. I sat in the dark office, the blue light of the monitor cutting across my face. I navigated to the login page for Ethan's personal cloud account. He always preached about cybersecurity to our clients, yet his own digital hygiene was pathetic. I typed in 6 digits, August 12th, 1986, his birthday. The screen flashed green. Access granted. His arrogance was my key. He assumed I would never look, or perhaps he thought he was too smart to be caught. I opened his synchronized messages. It was not just a romantic betrayal. It was a documented conspiracy. I scrolled through weeks of conversation between Ethan and Brielle. They were not just planning a weekend away, they were planning a complete displacement of my life. When we get back, we take the master suite. Brielle had written, I hate her taste in curtains. Don't worry, babe, Ethan replied. The house, the G-Wagon, the company. It will all be in my name by next month. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They were dissecting my existence like vultures picking at a carcass before the animal was even dead. Then I saw the message that made my blood turn into ice. Are you sure she will agree to the terms? Brielle asked. Ethan's response was immediate. She will sign. She always signs. Mallory is a workhorse, not a fighter. I stared at the screen. A workhorse, not a fighter. I did not take a screenshot. Screenshots can be faked. Screenshots can be argued in court. Instead, I opened my forensic data tools. I exported the raw data, the metadata, the IP addresses, and the timestamps. I created an immutable chain of custody for every single word they had typed. This was no longer a domestic dispute. It was evidence. I kept digging. In his sent folder, I found an email thread with a subject line that made me scoff. Urgent divorce filing. But the recipient was not a reputable firm. It was a strip mall legal service known for billboards that advertised fast and cheap legal services. Ethan was trying to divorce me on a budget. I opened the attachment labeled Draft Settlement AV1. It was standard garbage until I scrolled to the bottom. There was a power of attorney document attached. It authorized Ethan Royce to make financial decisions on behalf of Mallory Keene. And at the bottom, there was a signature. My signature. I leaned in closer. The loop on the M was too wide. The slant was 3 degrees off. I had not signed this. Ethan had practiced my signature, forged it, and scanned it. He intended to use this to sign the asset transfers himself if I refused. The game had just shifted from civil court to criminal fraud. I minimized the window and opened the internal ledger for Marrow & Co. I filtered the outgoing expenses for the last 12 months. I searched for consulting fees. There were 18 transactions, all just under $10,000 to avoid automatic banking flags, sent to a shell company registered in Delaware. The dates aligned perfectly with the weekends Ethan claimed he was networking. Relationship bonuses. He had called them when I asked about his expenses last year. You have to spend money to make money. Mal. He was stealing from me to fund the lifestyle he was using to impress his mistress. I waited until the sun began to bleed through the blinds. At 7 o'clock sharp, I picked up the phone and dialed our chief accountant, David. He answered on the second ring. Mallory, is everything okay? It's 7 in the morning. David, I need you to pull the transaction logs for the Vanguard account, I said, my voice steady and devoid of sleep. I suspect we have a compliance issue. What kind of issue? He asked, his voice tightening. If there are signs of unauthorized withdrawals by a senior executive, what is the emergency protocol? There was a pause on the other end. We freeze everything. Access cards, credit lines, digital signatures, immediate lockdown. Good, I said. Prepare the file. I am coming in. I hung up the phone and looked at the calendar on the wall. Ethan had 2 days left in his tropical paradise. 2 days of sunshine and cocktails. I needed exactly 48 hours to turn his paradise into quicksand. By the time his plane touched the tarmac, he would not be coming home to a wife. He would be walking into a trap that he had built with his own greed. I sat in a conference room enclosed by floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking the city that Ethan thought he owned. Across the mahogany table sat Robert, my lead counsel for the past decade. I did not wear sunglasses to hide puffy eyes. I wore a tailored black blazer and placed a single red folder on the table. I did not start the conversation by telling him I had been betrayed. Emotions are not admissible evidence. I have evidence of asset fraud and signature forgery, I said, my voice as sterile as the air conditioning. Robert adjusted his glasses and opened the folder. He scanned the documents in silence. I had laid it all out, the prenuptial agreement Ethan had refused to sign, but which was irrelevant because 90% of the assets were acquired by me prior to the marriage, and the corporate structure of Marrow & Co., which listed me as the sole shareholder with voting rights. This structure is bulletproof, Robert noted, tapping the page. But the forgery, that is the nuclear option. I know, I replied. I want to push the button. I slid the USB drive across the table. It contained the exported text logs, the metadata of his conversations with Brielle, and the high-resolution scan of the power of attorney document with the forged signature. He intends to file for divorce using a budget firm, I explained. He plans to use this forged document to transfer ownership of the holding company to himself before the filing dates are locked. Robert looked up, his expression hardening. This is a felony, Mallory. We can get an emergency freeze order within the hour. Shh, do it, I said. Freeze the joint accounts, freeze the investment portfolios, but leave the checking account ending in 459 open. Robert raised an eyebrow. Why, it has about $5,000 in it, I said. Enough for him to buy dinner and pay for a cab, but not enough to hire a real lawyer. If I cut him off completely today, he will panic and rush home. I need him to stay in paradise for 48 more hours. I need him to feel safe while I dismantle the floorboards. Understood, Robert said, already typing on his laptop. We will call it a bait account. I left the law firm and immediately opened the administration panel for the company on my phone. The digital dismantling began. I revoked Ethan's security tokens. I stripped his admin rights. I invalidated his digital signature. In the span of 3 minutes, the man who thought he ran the company became nothing more than a guest user with expired credentials. My next call was to our Director of Human Resources. We are activating the internal risk protocol for Ethan Royce, I said when she answered. Is there a specific cause? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Security breach and potential embezzlement, I answered efficiently. Suspend his access badge, remote wipe his company devices. Do not send a notification. Just let the system go dark on his end. I want no drama. Just compliance. Yes, ma'am. Consider it done. By noon, I was back at the house meeting with a specialized asset appraiser. He was not there to value my jewelry. He was there to value the vintage sports car in the garage, the one Ethan called his baby, but which was titled under Marrow & Co. as a corporate vehicle. It is in pristine condition, the appraiser said, running a gloved hand over the hood. We can move this quickly. Are you looking for top dollar or a fast sale? I want it gone by tomorrow, I said. Sell it to a wholesaler. After the appraiser left, I sat in the living room and opened the final piece of my defense, the SALT file. It was an irrevocable trust I had established in my second year of business. The acronym stood for Strategic Asset Liability Transfer. Ethan knew it existed, but he was too lazy to read the 60-page deed. If he had, he would have known that he was not a beneficiary. He was not even a trustee. He was a stranger to the money. My phone vibrated. A text from Ethan. "Hey, babe. Did you get the papers? The lawyer said we need to move fast for tax reasons." I stared at the message. The audacity was almost impressive. He was lying to me from a beach chair next to his mistress. I typed back a single line. "Send the papers. I will sign when my lawyer looks them over." A moment later, a heart reaction appeared on my message. I put the phone down on the coffee table. He thought he had won. He thought I was the dutiful wife, preparing to sign away my life. He had no idea that I was not signing a surrender. I was signing the closing documents on his entire existence. The sun had not yet crested the horizon when I picked up the phone to call the bank. I did not speak to a general representative. I dialed the direct line of the senior portfolio manager who handled our high net worth accounts. "I need to execute a total security reset on all accounts linked to my social security number," I said, my voice crisp. "Change the two-factor authentication to my personal device only. Set the transaction alert threshold to $1 and lock all supplementary cards issued to Ethan Royce." "Mrs. Royce, this will decline any recurring payments he has set up," the manager warned. "If he is traveling, he might be stranded." "That is a risk I am willing to take," I replied. "Redirect all paper and digital statements to my secure server. He is to receive nothing." From that moment on, every notification that used to ping Ethan's phone would come to mine. The silence on his end would be deafening until the moment he tried to swipe his card. Next, I called a specialized auto broker, a man who moved luxury vehicles like they were playing cards. Ethan's vintage Porsche, the car he loved more than he had ever loved me, was parked in the garage. He called it his baby. The title called it a corporate asset of Marrow & Co. "I have a 911 Turbo S," I told the broker. "I want a cash buyout. Today. I can get you 20% more if we wait for the right buyer," he said. "I do not want 20% more." I cut in. "I want it gone by noon. Fast and quiet. No questions." By 11 o'clock, the garage spot was empty. I did not sell the car because I was angry. I sold it because it was a tangible asset. And in war, you liquidate everything before the enemy can seize it. The house was a more complex operation. I was not selling Greyhaven out of spite. I was selling it because Ethan had used it as a weapon in his texts to Brielle, bragging about how he would kick me out of his house. But Greyhaven was held by a holding company I controlled. I called the developer who had been pestering us for the land for 2 years. "If you can close in 48 hours, it is yours," I said. 48 hours. "That is insane," the developer laughed. "But for that property, we will make it happen." I set the closing time for Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 hour after Ethan's flight was scheduled to land. He would leave the island as a homeowner and arrive at his front door as a trespasser. Then came the kill shot. I logged into the corporate server and initiated the migration I had prepared years ago as a contingency. I transferred every major client contract from Marrow & Co. to a new entity I had incorporated that morning, Keen Advisory Holdings. I called my core team into the conference room, the analysts, the strategists, the people who actually did the work while Ethan played golf. "Marrow & Co. was dissolving," I told them. "I am moving to a new firm. Your employment offers are in your inboxes. Same salary, better benefits, and no dead weight at the top. Who is with me?" They did not hesitate. They knew who signed the checks. They knew who the brains were. Within an hour, the office was effectively empty of talent. I sent a company-wide memo, effective immediately. All financial approvals required the digital signature of Mallory Keene. No exceptions. The silence from Ethan's end was broken only by a data intercept. I saw a new message from Brielle to Ethan. "Baby, you need to push her. My investors are getting impatient. We need that liquidity transfer by Friday or the deal falls through." I smiled coldly. Brielle wasn't just a mistress. She was desperate. She was using Ethan as a battering ram to get to my money, and he was too blinded by his ego to see he was being walked on a leash. He was frantic to please her, which meant he would make mistakes. I spent the final hours packing. I did not strip the house. That would look like panic. I packed with surgical precision 2 suitcases of clothes, 1 box of essential files, and 1 encrypted hard drive. I left the furniture. I left the art. I left the life we had built. It was all tainted now. Before I walked out the door, I placed a single, thick manila envelope on the entry console. I took a roll of red industrial tape and sealed it shut, sticking it to the marble surface so it could not be missed. On the front, in bold black marker, I wrote "open only in the bedroom." It was a command, and I knew Ethan. He would not be able to resist. I walked out into the cool evening air, leaving the door unlocked for him. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for the mouse to come home. The phone buzzed against the marble countertop, vibrating with a persistence that annoyed me. It was a FaceTime request. The screen lit up with Ethan's name and a photo of us from 3 years ago, back when I still believed his smile reached his eyes. I propped the phone up against a vase of lilies flowers I had bought for myself and answered. Ethan filled the screen. Behind him, the sun was setting over a turquoise ocean, painting the sky in hues of violent orange and purple. He looked tanned, relaxed, and utterly fraudulent. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice dripping with a synthetic sweetness that made my stomach turn. "I just wanted to check in. The signal out here is terrible, or I would have called sooner. Do you miss me?" I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the slight sunburn on his nose and the way his eyes kept darting to the left, likely checking if Brielle was out of the frame. "I miss the feeling of being left alone," I said, my voice calm. Ethan laughed, but it was a nervous, hollow sound. "You are always so funny. Look, I hate to bring up business while I am trying to relax, but I really need you to sign those transfer papers before tonight. The investors are pushing for a commitment. Send me a scanned copy," I replied, taking a sip of water. "My lawyer will review it and get back to you." His smile faltered. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the impatience beneath. "Mallory?" "Come on. Why do we need to drag lawyers into this? It is just internal restructuring. You know I would never hurt the company. I know exactly what you would do." "Ethan," I said. He sighed, running a hand through his wind-blown hair. "Don't make this difficult. Mal, I am doing this for the future. We need to be agile." "The future," I repeated slowly. "Whose future? Ethan yours or ours?" He paused. In that silence, the truth screamed louder than any confession. He did not say ours. He did not reassure me. He just looked annoyed that his administrative assistant, which is how he viewed me, was asking questions. "Just sign the damn thing. Mallory," he snapped, then quickly lowered his voice, forcing a smile back onto his face. "Please, for me, send it to the lawyer," I said, and ended the call before he could reply. I sat there in the dim light of the kitchen, analyzing the conversation. In a 2-minute call, he had used the word I or me 12 times. He had used we exactly once, and only to manipulate me. He had already checked out of this marriage. He was just trying to secure his golden parachute before he pulled the ripcord. 5 minutes later, an email landed in my inbox. It was from the budget law firm he had hired. The subject line read, "Urgent Settlement Agreement." I opened the attachment. It was worse than I thought. It was a coercive document that attempted to sign over 50% of my premarital assets under the guise of community property investment. They were trying to bully me into a corner. I did not get angry. I did not type a furious reply detailing his infidelity. I simply opened a blank document, typed 1 sentence, and converted it to a PDF. "Please cease all direct contact immediately. All further communication must be routed through my legal counsel." I hit send. A moment later, my phone pinged again. This time it was not Ethan. It was a message from a junior associate in my PR department, a girl named Jessica, whom I had mentored for 2 years. "Mrs. Keene, I thought you should see this." It was posted on a private influencer forum, but it leaked. Attached was a screenshot. It was a draft post from Brielle's social media account, scheduled to go live on Tuesday afternoon. The caption was a masterpiece of victimhood. It talked about finding love in hopeless places and surviving a toxic ex-wife who controlled everything. She was planning to launch her personal brand on the corpse of my reputation. I stared at the image. Brielle was not just sleeping with my husband, she was planning to monetize the destruction of my character. She thought she was playing chess, but she was playing checkers. She had no idea that I had the chat logs, the financial records, and the metadata to prove who the real predator was. I opened my master list and added a 13th item. Prepare media counterstrike. Release the truth, exact time, exact dosage. I closed my laptop. The house was quiet. For the first time in weeks, the crushing weight on my chest was gone. I walked up the stairs to the guest room where I was sleeping. I felt light. I felt clean. I realized then that I wasn't fighting to save my marriage anymore. I was fighting to sanitize my life. I lay down on the crisp sheets and closed my eyes. I slept deeply, without dreams, knowing that the war was already won. I was just waiting for the enemy to walk onto the minefield. It was late Sunday afternoon when the black town car pulled into the driveway of Greyhaven. I was miles away in a temporary apartment, watching the live feed from the security camera mounted above the front porch. Ethan stepped out first, wearing a linen shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest, looking every bit the conquering hero returning to his castle. Brielle followed him, holding a duty-free bag and laughing at something he said. They looked victorious. They looked like they had gotten away with it. Ethan walked up the stone steps to the massive oak front door. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his key ring. He slid the key into the lock and turned it. The handle did not budge. He frowned, pulled the key out, and jammed it back in with more force. "The lock must be jammed," he muttered, twisting it violently. "This happens sometimes when the humidity spikes." Brielle was not looking at the lock. She had stepped closer to the bay window that looked into the formal living room. She cupped her hands against the glass to block out the glare. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely audible through the camera's microphone. "Why is the house so empty?" Ethan stopped wrestling with the door and looked through the glass. The living room was stripped. The Italian leather sofas were gone. The grand piano was gone. The abstract paintings that he loved to tell guests cost $50,000 were gone. The room looked like a vacant model home. Ethan pulled out his phone. He dialed my number. I watched the screen as my phone buzzed on the table next to me. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text appeared on my screen. "Don't be childish. Open the door." I did not reply. Ethan turned to pay the driver who was still idling in the driveway. He tapped his platinum card against the reader. The machine beeped a harsh, dissonant tone. Declined. Ethan laughed nervously. "Try it again. Chip is sensitive." The driver tried again. Declined. Ethan pulled out his phone to check his banking app. I could see the panic starting to set in. His thumb tapped the screen furiously. "Account not found," he whispered. He opened the company expense app. "User credentials revoked." A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, cutting through the fake tan. Then, his phone chimed. It was the only notification getting through the blockade. It was an automated email from the law firm. Notice of emergency asset freeze and transfer. Brielle saw the subject line. She snatched the phone from his hand. Her eyes scanned the legal text. Her face went pale, the color draining away until she looked like a wax figure. "What is this?" she whispered. "Asset freeze investigation for fraud." Ethan snatched the phone back and dialed the number at the bottom of the email. He put it on speaker. "She can't do this," he screamed at the poor operator on the other end. "This is my house. That is my money. You can't just lock me out." The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and devastating. The freeze was executed legally this morning, sir. The title to the property has been transferred to the holding company, and you are no longer an authorized occupant. Brielle took a step back. She looked at the man she had spent the weekend with, the man she thought was her ticket to the high life. You told me you owned all of this, she said, her voice shaking. You said you were the founder. Ethan stammered, his hands shaking as he held the useless phone. I am the face of the company. I represent the brand. It's a technicality, babe. We just need to fix the paperwork. You are a representative, she asked, her voice rising. You are an employee. I am the co-founder, he tried to say, but the lie died in his throat. Brielle didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply pulled out her own phone and opened a rideshare app. She tapped a few times and turned around to walk down the driveway to the street. Brielle, where are you going? Ethan yelled, running a few steps after her. We can fix this. She stopped and turned around. The look on her face was not love. It was disgusted clarity. I don't sleep with men who have nothing, she said, her voice cutting through the humid air like a knife, especially when they have no truth. She got into the car that pulled up a minute later and slammed the door. Ethan was left standing on the porch of a house he couldn't enter, holding a suitcase full of dirty laundry and a phone that couldn't make a payment. He was exactly where he deserved to be outside. Ethan collapsed onto the limestone steps of the house he no longer owned. I watched the feed from the security camera as the blue light of his phone illuminated his face. He was scrolling through social media, expecting to see Brielle's carefully crafted hit piece against me. Instead, he found a massacre of his own reputation. Someone perhaps a loyal employee, perhaps just the inevitable justice of the internet had leaked the real story. Brielle's draft post about a toxic ex-wife was there, but it was side by side with the timestamps of his hotel bookings and the metadata I had extracted. The internet is a cruel judge, and the verdict was instant. A meme was already trending locally. It showed 2 photos: Ethan on the yacht with the caption "Weekend with Mistress," and Ethan standing alone on the curb with the caption "Monday with Nothing." I did not post a single word. I did not need to. Silence is the loudest scream when you have the truth on your side. Ethan's phone pinged. It was a message from Marcus, his favorite drinking buddy and occasional business partner. Ethan, we need to pause our collaboration. My legal team says Marrow & Co. is a shell. All the contracts moved to a new holding firm. Do not contact me until you clear this up. Panic finally mobilized him. Ethan scrambled up and called a rideshare, likely using the last few dollars on a prepaid card he kept for emergencies. He headed straight to the office. I switched my view to the security cameras in the building lobby. He ran to the glass doors of the suite where Marrow & Co. had operated for 6 years. He stopped dead. The frosted glass signage was gone. The doors were locked. Inside, the desks were cleared. The servers were unplugged and the lights were off. It was as if we had never existed. He pounded on the glass, but the only response was the echo of his own fist. No, 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 he muttered, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. This cannot be happening. He pulled out his phone again, desperation making his fingers clumsy. He remembered the one account I had left open, the bait account. He logged in, praying for a lifeline, hoping I had forgotten a few $1,000s. He stared at the balance. It was exactly $9.99. Under the transaction history, there was a single memo attached to the balance transfer. For someone who thought love was a credit card. Ethan slid down the glass wall until he hit the floor. He had one option left. He dialed his father. I could only hear Ethan's side of the conversation, but I knew my father-in-law well enough to fill in the blanks. Dad, I am in trouble, Ethan said, his voice cracking. I need a transfer, just $10,000. I will pay you back next week. There was a long silence. Then Ethan flinched. No, well, Yes, we are separating, Ethan stammered. But she took everything. She is crazy. Another silence. Then Ethan went quiet. He whispered, I made a mistake. The line went dead. His father was a man of old-school honor. He did not subsidize betrayal. Ethan tried to call 3 different law firms. I watched him pace the empty hallway. Each call ended the same way. Without a $5,000 retainer paid up front, no one was interested in hearing his story. He was learning the hardest lesson of his life without money. You do not have a voice. He returned to the house an hour later, defeated and exhausted. He walked up the driveway, likely hoping to beg, to plead, to charm his way back into a warm bed. That was when he saw it. I had asked the movers to leave one thing behind. A thick, cream-colored envelope was clamped to the brass handle of the front door. It was sealed with red industrial tape. On the front, written in my sharp, angular handwriting, were 5 words, "Open only in the bedroom." Ethan stared at it. He looked around the empty yard, sensing that he was being watched, though he could not see the camera lens. He reached out and grabbed the envelope. It felt heavy. "What are you playing at? Mallory," he whispered to the air. He looked at the front door, knowing his key would not work. Then he looked toward the side of the house, where the mudroom entrance was located. He remembered that the lock there had been sticky for years, a flaw he had promised to fix a dozen times but never did. He believed that the bedroom still held the answer. He believed that inside that room, he could find something to leverage, or perhaps he just wanted to feel like he was inside his own life one last time. He walked toward the side gate, clutching the envelope like a lifeline. He was walking right into the final act. I watched the security feed as Ethan slipped through the mudroom entrance. The lock on that door had been faulty for 6 months, a detail I had intentionally neglected to fix. He moved through the kitchen with the stealth of a thief in his own home. The house was cavernous and silent, amplifying the sound of his Italian loafers on the hardwood. He did not call out my name. He knew I wasn't there. He headed straight for the master bedroom. He needed a win. He needed to find something, anything, that would give him leverage. The bedroom was dark, the curtains drawn tight against the afternoon sun. I had stripped the room of everything personal. There were no photos, no jewelry boxes, no perfumes. The only thing remaining was the bed frame and the mattress. Sitting in the precise center of the bed was a bright red envelope and a small black USB drive. Ethan approached the bed slowly. He ripped open the red envelope, his hands trembling. He expected a letter, perhaps a tearful confession of my undying love or a bitter rant about his infidelity. What he found was a single sheet of heavy bond paper with a government seal at the top. It was a notice of investigation for financial fraud and embezzlement, accompanied by a subpoena for an interview scheduled for tomorrow morning. He dropped the paper as if it were burning hot. He looked at the USB drive. He sat down on the edge of the mattress and pulled his laptop from his bag. He plugged the drive in. A video file popped up on his screen. It was a screen recording of his own private chat logs, synced with the audio voice notes he had sent. His own voice filled the empty room, tinny and incriminating. "I can just forge the signature on the power of attorney," his voice said, casual and arrogant. "Mallory never checks the subclauses. Once the transfer clears, we dump the stock and run." Then came the voice of Brielle, but it was not the flirtatious cooing he was used to. It was sharp, professional, and asking leading questions designed to get him to confess on tape. "Are you sure that is untraceable? Ethan, how exactly do you structure the shell company?" I leaned back in my chair, miles away. Brielle was never just a pretty face he met at a fundraiser. She was a freelance forensic accountant who specialized in honey traps for corporate fraud investigations. I had not hired her, but when she flagged his suspicious activity months ago, I had cooperated. I gave her the access she needed to get him to hang himself. She did not leave him on the driveway because she was a gold digger who lost her prize. She left because her case file was closed. Ethan slammed the laptop shut. He scrambled off the bed and ran to the walk-in closet. He tore open the false panel in the wall where we kept the floor safe. He spun the dial left to 20, right to 10, left to 5. The heavy steel door clicked open. It was empty. The stacks of emergency cash, the bearer bonds, the deeds, all gone. In the center of the velvet-lined box lay a single index card with my handwriting. "You are looking for things that don't belong to you." His phone began to vibrate in his pocket. The sound was deafening in the silence. He pulled it out. It was a number he did not recognize. "Hello," he answered, his voice breathless. "Mr. Ethan Royce," a stern voice asked. "This is Special Agent Miller from the Financial Crimes Division. We have been monitoring your location. We need you to remain at the residence for a preliminary interview regarding irregular transactions linked to your identity." I, Ethan stammered. He didn't finish the sentence. He dropped the phone and bolted. He ran out of the bedroom, down the stairs, sprinting toward the front door. He grabbed the handle and yanked. It was locked. He tried the deadbolt. It spun freely, disengaged but refusing to open. I tapped a command on my keyboard. The smart home system had engaged the perimeter lockdown. A soft, rhythmic chime began to pulse through the house speakers. It was not a deafening siren, just a gentle, persistent beep that signaled the security system was recording an intruder's presence. Ethan stood in the center of the foyer, his chest heaving. He looked at the walls, at the ceiling, realizing for the first time that the house was not a shelter. It was a cage. He had thought he was the architect of my destruction, but he had merely been a character in a story I was writing. I had not just taken the money. I had taken the narrative, the truth, and the control. And I had left him with absolutely nothing but the consequences of his own ambition. Ethan stumbled back into the bedroom as if pulled by an invisible gravity. The laptop screen he had slammed shut moments ago had flickered back to life. But the video of his own betrayal was gone. In its place was a high-definition live stream. It was a boardroom meeting. I recognized the polished mahogany table and the faces of the senior analysts who had walked out of Marrow and Company only hours earlier, but the logo on the wall behind them was different. It read Keen Advisory Holdings. And at the head of the table, a digital nameplate glowed with my name listed as Chief Executive Officer. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes widening as he saw the seating arrangement on the screen. There was one empty chair at the far end of the table. The digital overlay labeled it simply Ethan Guest. He was not an owner. He was not a partner. He was a visitor in a room he used to think he ruled. My lawyer, Robert, appeared in the frame. He looked directly into the camera lens, his eyes cold and professional. "We are now commencing the final asset restructuring," Robert said, his voice crisp. "The ownership rights, access privileges, and power of attorney previously held by Mr. Ethan Royce are hereby terminated with immediate effect due to a breach of fiduciary duty." Then, my voice cut through the silence of the bedroom. I was not in the video feed. I was speaking through the audio link, my voice calm and encompassing, filling the room where Ethan stood alone. "You wanted to replace your wife in a single weekend." "Ethan," I said, "I just replaced the system." He stared at the laptop speakers, his face twisting in confusion and rage. "But you signed the papers." "You signed the transfer, I did," I replied. "And that was your mistake. You thought that paper handed you the company. You never read the fine print of the SALT Trust. That transfer document was the trigger mechanism. By signing it while you were actively engaged in proven financial fraud and adultery, I activated the poison pill clause. The moment I signed, the trust automatically stripped you of every single asset to protect the beneficiary. You didn't force me to sign away my fortune. Ethan, you forced me to sign your eviction notice." Ethan let out a scream that tore through his throat, a raw sound of pure frustration. "No, you can't do this." His scream was swallowed by the empty house. I did not answer. Instead, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed from the front door downstairs. It was exactly 5 o'clock. Ethan froze. He looked at the window, then at the door. The sound of the doorbell rang out, followed by a voice amplified by a megaphone. "Mr. Royce, this is the Department of Financial Investigation. We have a warrant for your electronic devices and financial records. Open the door." He looked around the room one last time, his eyes darting frantically, searching for me. He wanted a fight. He wanted to scream in my face, to grab my shoulders, to play the victim one last time. But I had denied him that satisfaction. I was not there to be his audience. Ethan slumped. He grabbed the laptop and the phone, his shoulders shaking, and walked slowly down the stairs to face the consequences he had ordered for himself. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Brielle did not stick around to comfort a broke man. She vanished the moment the investigation went public, scrubbing her social media clean. Marcus blocked Ethan's number and issued a press release distancing himself from the scandal. Ethan's reputation did not collapse because of rumors. It collapsed under the crushing weight of the evidence I had meticulously preserved. I stood in the center of my new apartment. It was smaller than Greyhaven, with simple lines and no marble statues, but it felt infinite because it was mine. I opened my laptop and pulled up the very first contract for Keen Advisory Holdings. I typed my name on the signature line. Then, I picked up my phone. I scrolled to Ethan's contact info. I did not block him. I did not archive the chat. I simply pressed delete. I did not do it out of hatred. I did it because he no longer had the right to exist in my future. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to Victoria Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.